All right, let's get started.
All right. So, welcome everyone. Nick Wagner Sr. It's 8 o'clock on Sunday night, which means I have another awesome guest for the Full Potential podcast. And I don't think this Sunday night will be any different. We have a great guest tonight lined up, and I'm going to introduce Karen in 1 second. But I just want to first say we do this every Sunday night. We record it live, so we are live right now. So this is like live TV, Karen. So we got it. I always make sure I share that with my guests, but we record it live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And then I'll take the audio from this and I'll actually convert it to the Full Potential podcast. And you'll be able to find this on all major podcast platforms. So Karen, everyone will be able to hear this conversation on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Google, wherever you find your home for podcasts, they'll be able to find it. So, and we do this, Karen, as we mentioned, to hopefully inspire people about what could be with their career journey. So I get to interview amazing guests like you that share their career journey and are gracious enough to take some time out of their day and their busy schedules to hopefully inspire others with what you've done in your career. So first, thank you for taking the time and welcome to the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And hello to everyone listening.
I think it's going to be fun. So Karen, let's. I always start with this question. I want you to formally introduce yourself because I usually kind of start that way because I often ask, like, when someone meets you for the first time, and maybe this was pre-COVID when we actually met people in person.
Yeah.
How do you introduce yourself if you're at a conference or at an event? What's your formal introduction look like?
I normally just say, I'm Karen Hinds, founder and CEO of Workplace Success Group. We are a boutique strategic development firm. We focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership development. And that's about as much as I say when I meet people.
And then it kind of goes from there.
And then it goes from there, of course.
Because there's a lot in that really short introduction, and we're going to obviously talk, Karen, about your business that you just mentioned. We'll dive into that tonight, and we will link to just to make sure I always share this in the show description on both YouTube and the podcast. We'll link to your LinkedIn if people want to get in touch with you, Karen, as well as your business's website. So if people want to get in touch with you about some possible work with Workplace Success Group, they'll be able to get in touch with you there as well. So we're gonna get to how you ended up being an entrepreneur and a small business owner and the CEO of your own company. We'll get there, but I always like to kind of go back in time to figure out how that journey unfolded.
Yeah.
So my first question, if we go back in time when you were little Karen, right, and you were 7, 8, 9-year-old Karen, was your dream to be an entrepreneur and own your own business? Was that something you always wanted to do, or did you not know at that point?
No, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur, although I did have a business when I was younger. So 7, 8-year-old Karen got in trouble for speaking too much in class. I remember my teacher saying, Karen is a great student, but she's too talkative. Little did she know what would happen in my life later on. But I had my first business around age 8. I used to sell what's called tamarind balls. It's a tamarind is a fruit. You pack it with sugar and you make it balls out of it. And I would sell that in my school as a way for me to raise funds for our local church to buy a mat. Go figure, right? So yeah, that was my first entrepreneurial adventure, but had no interest in doing this as I got older. I wanted to be a doctor, or a journalist, or a lawyer. Those are my aspirations.
So it was never an entrepreneur. It was never, do leadership development and diversity, equity, inclusion work. It was okay, interesting. And we're gonna, and Karen, I know we talked before this. We'll when we get to what your company does, I'll have you define some of these things that you do because you and I work in the HR space, so we're kind of used to this talk, but not everyone listening might know what all these topics are. So we'll get there. So you mentioned you wanted to be a doctor or a journalist. Was the expectation for you to go to college and earn a degree when you were done with your schooling, or what was that like in your family?
I think in my family, it was always education comes first. They didn't really care what kind of education. You just had to make sure you took every possible measure to better yourself. So it was no excuses. You figure out what you wanted to do. My parents never told us who we should become. They just said, educate yourself, be the best you can do. And there was not an option to say, we think you might go to school. It's like, you're going. It's a foregone conclusion. You just have to figure out how and where you're going to go and what you'll do. So,
Yeah, and that's I always ask that because I think it's really different depending on your family and your upbringing what the answer to that question is.
mhm, mhm.
And I've had some really successful people on this show that have gone to college, and I've had some really successful people on this show that never went to college.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of depends. I like to kind of showcase that there's all different journeys. Everyone's journey is so unique. So
Yeah.
what did you go to school for? So what was the ultimate decision? What did you go to college for?
I had a political science major with a concentration in international relations and a minor in Spanish. So this whole education piece, my parents came from the beautiful island nation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines when I was 15 and brought the entire family specifically for an education. So that's why I said we didn't have an option because they literally uprooted their entire lives and came to the United States and started all over again. And so for
You were 15 when you left your
us,
home country
yes, I was
and moved to the United States.
exactly, exactly.
That's a tough time to make a move like that.
That was a tough time, especially since I decided to move from the Caribbean in January and took 4 kids to Boston, Massachusetts. So I like, couldn't you have gone to some of the place warm? And then I didn't really make it better, but I went to college in Brunswick, Maine. So, you go where the education is. I went to Bowdoin College. You forget about the weather, and you think about advancement and what was important for the betterment of your life and your career.
Yeah, I mean that is an absolute, to your point, that is some dedication to education, and for your parents to make such a huge move, I understand why it was important for you to
Oh,
get
yeah.
your education.
Oh, yeah.
So what was you mentioned you went to Bowdoin College for political science. Well, what was the plan to do with that degree? Did you have a plan going in, like you're going to graduate and get a job here doing this, or did you not really know at that point?
I think when initially I thought I'm definitely going to get a degree, I'll be an ambassador or a lawyer. And then as I got close to the graduation, I realized I don't like this. There's nothing about this I enjoy. I didn't want to go to law school. I knew you couldn't be an ambassador right out of the college. I didn't want to work in corporate. So I found myself in this very precarious situation where I have a college degree and have absolutely zero career direction. And the only thing I know how to do was speak really well. I knew how to engage people, but didn't know what do you do with that anyway. So I was in this very tough position because I have a degree, but had no clue what I was going to do to make a living.
Uh, and look, we have a lot of early career people that listen to this
Yeah.
this podcast, and I think many people find themselves
Hmm.
in that exact situation where they have gone to school,
Hmm.
they've graduated, and then they're like, now what, right?
Yeah,
So, or they went to school and realized maybe I didn't go to school for the right thing,
yeah.
but that's a hard thing to admit, and so I think that's a challenge for people. So I understand that.
Yeah.
So what did you end up doing when you were going to school? What was your first job out of college? Even though you didn't really know what you wanted to do.
So right out of college, I realized I was in a jam, so to speak. So I had to figure something out really quickly. I applied for something called the Watson Foundation Fellowship, and it bought me a year basically. So I was able to travel. The Watson Foundation is through the IBM company. And what they've said is, they're giving college students, college graduates, a chance to explore the world. So I was one of 65 students who were chosen across the nation
Wow.
who applied for this fellowship. And my study was around politics and music in the Caribbean because Maine was cold. I mean, I had enough of the cold. So I spent a year traveling to 6 different Caribbean islands, looking at politics and music, the intersectionality of those two. And that bought me a year. And then when I came back, mentor of mine gave me a job working at the University of Massachusetts to buy me some more time before I actually started a career training and counseling high school students to work in financial services industry. So I bumped around a little bit here before I actually landed a full-time job, but it was the best experience of my life because it gave me an opportunity to figure out what do I like? What do I want to do with my life and learn how to make connections at the same time.
Yeah, and and you mentioned your mentor helped you land
Mhm.
your job, which is such a mentorship
Yeah.
is such a huge part
Yes.
of
Yes.
how you have navigate your career journey. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
What was it like with working with the high school students? Did you enjoy it? Were you energized by it? How did you feel on that job?
I think for me, that job gave me an insight. It was a window into my future, but I didn't know that at the time. So at the time, I was working for an organization. Their whole premise was to diversify talent pipelines in the Boston area. So working with high school students was to help. A lot of them were first generation students. A lot of them were immigrants, and they were in one of the tough high schools in Boston. So my job was to help them, show them how they can secure an internship, get corporate experience, and how do they navigate that world. And that opened my eye, my first taste of the lack of diversity in certain corporate positions. But I didn't really know that was diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just
Right.
knew I had talented students who were looking for access. And that entire program, the premises of it was to give people access to opportunities they wouldn't ordinarily have
Yeah.
because they don't have connections, they don't have their parents,
They don't have the network.
they
Right.
have zero
Right.
network. Mhm.
So, and that's so it's interesting how it took you a few years to land that job and find that, but I think you obviously used it well by getting to tour the world with the IBM Foundation and do other things. What How did that job end up, I don't know, like maybe lighting the fire for you to start your own business? Like how did you make that transition? Because
Uh-huh.
that seems like an interesting jump.
Yeah, that was the last job I had before I started my company. So as I started developing training materials because the organization I was working for, they didn't give me training materials, and I saw a gap. So here I am
Right.
trying to figure out how to help these high school students acclimate to corporate culture, and I didn't have a manual. So I started making up my own training manuals and helping the students to understand business etiquette, helping them to recognize why is it important to network, why is it important to manage up, how to be a better team player, just the basics of working in a very different environment. And in the process of doing that, I saw another gap where we had a lot of supervisors who would never work with people who were different from them culturally and ethically and racially. So I developed another workshop for supervisors managing diverse interns. And the companies liked that. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you know you could make a living?" I'm thinking, doing what? Talking? Like, who pays anybody to talk? Because in my mind, I didn't see it as education. I was doing something I love. So I started moonlighting, first helping people who were looking for jobs, getting into the world of work, preparing them. And, my first private assignment, I literally went up to an organization and I said, "I noticed you have an ad in the newspaper for a trainer." And I know she must have thought I was a crazy person. I said, "Don't hire anyone. I'll do it for free." And I think she thought I was nuts. Like, what is wrong with you? I said, "Don't hire anyone. I'll be your trainer. You don't have to pay me," because I looked at that as an opportunity to really begin to have my own material developed. And after 2 weeks, she said, "You know what? You're really good. We're going to pay you." And the hourly rate she paid me was more than I was getting in my job. And I said, "Wait a minute, something's going on here. It doesn't take a
So
rocket science."
so you volunteered to do that because you
That,
wanted to start practicing.
oh
That
yeah,
was your way to gain practice.
yes.
And I think that's I want to pause there for a second because I think that's a really interesting point. I shared this with a lot of college students that sometimes taking an unpaid internship or an unpaid volunteer opportunity is a really great way to get experience.
Mhm.
And who knows what it might lead to. And you gave a great example of that.
Yeah, I had to keep working though, because I think one of the things for some young people working, they have to have the financial piece going. So I had my regular job that brought the money in, but
Right.
this piece on the side gave me the experience. So for people who are navigating that financial piece, especially now that we're in a virtual world, I think it's a lot easier to have a paying job and have something virtual you can do on the side to gain exposure and gain experience as well. So that's what
So they started paying you and then you had an epiphany.
I had an epiphany, because then the paying went to a contract. So they contracted me for a season, and that led to a referral to a second paying contract. Still had my regular day job. I was doing this after work and in the evenings, and that led to a longer contract. So I had 2 or 3 contracts lined up before I said, "All right, it doesn't take anybody smarter than this to realize this could be a business. So I started learning about speaking and training, what that meant, how to get a business started. I joined a couple of associations. I found mentors. I was basically a pain in everybody's side. I was knocking on doors. I had no shame. Even though I was scared, I was still asking the questions. Can you help me? Can you show me? And when they gave me information, I was always following up and being very grateful, keeping them abreast of my progress. So I was knocking on any door that looked like a door to give me any information I could, so I could get a better sense of it. So yeah, that's what I did.
And what being a trainer and doing these like putting all this material together and then delivering it.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier in the interview that you'd always liked public speaking. That
Oh yeah,
even as a little kid, you
oh
were
yeah.
never really intimidated by speaking. So that must have been easy for you, which is part of the reason you probably love this.
Yeah, it was easy for me because as a child growing up in the Caribbean, we grew up in the church. So the church and faith is very important to me. So part of what, from the time I could speak, they would make us, and I'm not saying it was volunteer, they will make you stand in front of the entire church. And you had to recite certain verses by heart. And I'm not talking 2 lines, I'm talking paragraphs. So by the time I was a speaker, I had already been under the scrutiny of my entire village in the church. And these are folks I'm going to see every day. So I better not mess up. So that was nothing for me. I didn't cower under the spotlight of being able to speak in front of other audiences because it was something I was doing from since I was 4 or 5 years old.
That's so interesting. And I mean, that's how you get good at public speaking is practice. So, and that
Yeah.
was exactly what you did. But that's just, it's such a great story. And I love that. And I think for a lot of people, you found something that you found something that paid you
Mhm.
for something that you were passionate about, which is
Mhm.
doesn't always happen. So I love how they kind of intersected. So you got some contracts, you got some referrals, and at that point you decided I need to actually create a business. And that was back in 1998. Is that correct? According
Yeah,
to LinkedIn?
98. Well, I think when people hear you start a business, they think, oh, you got a contract, you made money, and you can be a millionaire, and it's all wonderful. Well, I didn't have any business training. I had no clue what I was doing. And I jumped, I left my job. The contracts are going great. And then the contracts ran out. And because I had no business savvy, I was not able to sell quicker to get the next contract. So I remember sitting in my basement after the last contract ended and bawling my eyes out because I had no contracts and no money and had no clue how on earth I was going to pay my bills, because here I am, I'm doing my passion, right? But I had to, it was a tough lesson because I had to rely uh, on, now learning and getting back on my feet and really scraping to get by. And I figured, all right, you're down, you're out, you have no clue what you're doing. How are you going to get back and become known as an expert? Because now I'm learning it's important to be an expert in something, and decided I was going to write a book. So I wrote a book, and I didn't have a publisher. So I looked up how to self-publish, and I self-published a book, and that gave me the momentum I needed to jumpstart again after spending a couple of months in the basement bawling my eyes out because I had no money and I had no business plan and I had no idea what the heck I was doing, but I had lots of passion. I can talk
It's
about it now.
well, no, it's been like almost 23 years. So you laugh about it now, but I think you bring up a great point that a lot of people look at being an entrepreneur as this really glamorous
Oh no.
adventure,
Uh,
and it's actually I've done it. You've done it. It's the hardest thing that I think most people ever do,
mhm.
is be an entrepreneur. So I'm glad you shared what it some trials and tribulations of what it was really like. And that's interesting how you decided to write a book, and that was what kind of gave you the credibility to then keep moving forward and get more work. So I love that. How did you? I want you to share with the audience. So what does Workplace Success Group do today? So like what do you offer, and how has that kind of evolved over the years that you've done it, right? Or is it or are some of the things you do today the same core things you did 23 years ago?
No, look, 23 years ago, I was mostly working with youth, and now I work a lot with corporate executives. So I don't do as much youth work as I did. I did high schools and colleges. I don't
Okay.
do as much as that now, but I still have some of it. For the most part, we work exclusively with executives on this diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership development.
So explain what those two things mean for my audience, because I know you and I could talk about that for hours, but share what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what does that mean in the work that you do with a company, as well as leadership development?
So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think what we're talking, when people say diversity is being invited to the dance. I think the CEO of, the diversity officer at Netflix said that, and inclusion is being invited to dance. So when we think about diversity, it's having all the different people in the air, in your business, in your team. Inclusion, however, is when you're able to really make people feel a part of the team. They're really part of what's going on here. They're critical. They feel like their contribution is valuable, and they're able to feel like, hey, I belong here. You're going to listen to my thoughts. Equity, people think about equality, but we don't want equality. We want equity. We want you to recognize that we're on the same level, because equality and equity are very different, and people need to understand that as well.
And then what about leadership development, Karen? What is that?
I think for a lot of people, they think that leadership development is about the position or the title. It's not. It's about how do you master who you are, so you're able to bring to the table your full potential, all of who you are, so it can benefit the organization you're in. And people don't think about it. They think it's a title. It's not. So I encourage everybody who we do leadership development with, how do you master being who you are, your skills, your talents, your emotions, your connections, to make a bigger contribution to whatever organization you're in, and your family, because it's not just about corporate, it's about your personal and your professional life.
No, I think that's well said. Mm-hmm. And it's been a journey for you, right? So 23 years almost owning your own business. You started out just yourself. So mm-hmm. It was you crying in the basement, trying to figure things out, right? And now, almost a quarter of a century later, you've got multiple employees. You do business all around the world. So do you share some of those pivotal points over the past 23 years of the business that you think my audience would benefit hearing from? Because I know that obviously things change, right? I mean, you've lived through some amazing changes within the world of business. COVID, mm-hmm. COVID being one now that we're obviously dealing with. But share some of the great things that have happened over the 23 years that you're really proud of.
So there are so many of them. I have 5 books under my belt at this point.
That's awesome.
We've had a number of years where we led a women's and girls leadership conference in the Caribbean, back in my island, where we flew people in from across the globe and had speakers come in. And that for me is one of my proudest accomplishments. But I think for me, as we look back at these last 23 plus years, really it's about how do you ensure that every day you get up, you're giving your best. So I went from having just myself to bringing someone on to help out every now and then, and you realize you need a couple other people. So it wasn't like, oh, you wake up and boom, you're the company. It's trying and failing and failing and failing and failing and trying and doing well. And over the years, we found that we've developed a consistent brand that people enjoy working for us. Our clientele, the majority of our clientele is all referral based. We don't do tons of advertising. So it's been a process over the 23 years to get where we are. And you do it one client at a time, and you deliver exceptional service, and you wow your client. And when you make a mistake, you come back and say, you know what? We messed up. How can we make this right? Because I can't say it's been a perfect journey. No company has had a perfect journey. So that's how we've made it to 23 years so far.
No, I think that's well said. And again, I think for a lot of people that have never been an entrepreneur, you've shared some of what it's really like to be an entrepreneur, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean all of a sudden that you can do whatever you want and work whenever you want, et cetera, right? And it's a grind to get to where you've gotten. So I want to ask a couple questions about COVID and what that has done, because you obviously have a unique perspective
Mhm.
with the work that you do on how COVID has affected the business world. And then I want to also then shift to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's start with COVID. How
Mhm.
has that changed the way that you work, right? Because I'm assuming someone like yourself was going to companies, doing keynotes in person, doing training in person. Your team was traveling a lot. How has COVID changed all that?
Everything is 100% virtual. And I love it. I can't imagine going back on the road. I don't miss the hotels. I don't miss the plane rides. I don't miss the food. I think for us now, we're able to give our clients more. And because they're at home, they're a bit more. So some people, it's giving them a different way to think. So for us, we're 100% virtual. We have no intentions of going back out in person, at least for another year and a half, maybe two. And we're able to serve our clients better because we don't have as much time on the road like we used to. So it's working well for us and we love it.
And that's interesting. And how have your clients,
Mhm.
how have they acclimated to the work at home and the virtual piece? Do you think people are getting more and more used to it? I mean, I've been using this platform that we're on since last November. It was pre-COVID, and
Uh-huh.
this is obviously a common way that people do interviews on on LinkedIn or YouTube. But how do you think your clients are handling it?
You know, the funny thing is, before COVID, we had already started conversations and had already started delivering programs, hybrid, partially in person and online. And I remember a lot of our clients, some of them were saying, no, we don't want to do that. That's just too much. Nobody's going to learn. Now they're realizing that when employees are probably giving more because they're working from home. Unfortunately, they're literally connected to work. So you fall out of bed and you fall into the office. So a lot of clients are now recognizing that their employees are giving more. A lot of our clients are seeing better results, better productivity. And at the same time, because of the environment in which we live, a lot of people are stressed as well. So you
Right.
get high productivity, but you also know with the elections, with the COVID, with what's happening with last year with the murder of George Floyd, you have all of that coming together while we have these other pieces going on. So it's created quite a stressful situation. At the same time, people are stepping up to the plate.
Interesting. Yeah, and obviously COVID has impacted people and businesses in very different ways, right? I mean, it sounds like your business has successfully pivoted and been able to be successful, which is great for you. I want to talk about what you brought up with diversity, equity, inclusion, because I think this is an important point before we get to our last question. I mentioned I have a lot of early career individuals that listen to the podcast. So I'd love to hear your advice for an individual that's either about to graduate from college or that is, just in maybe their first job out of college or out of school. How do you think they should approach this topic of their diversity, equity, inclusion? And I ask this because of this. For years, and we're both in HR. For years, it was we don't talk about race at work, right? That was something that a lot of people didn't talk about, and that was what you were told by your parents, your mentors, your teachers, your managers, etc. Name the person. Was we don't talk about race.
Mhm.
That has all changed. So now race is, I think, talked about much more frequently in many corporate environments and even small and mid-sized businesses. So if you're a young professional in the workforce, what is your advice to those individuals for this topic of diversity, equity, inclusion? How should they approach something like this? Because for a lot of people, it's obviously a very sensitive topic. And if you're an older generation, like my parents were baby boomers, they never talked about this at work when they were working. So I'd love to hear some of your perspective because you're an expert in this field.
So I think for young career individuals, recognize that everybody has a different experience in America. There's not just one America. And for a lot of people around racial lines, there's the dilemma of having access. So when we talk about race, we're not just talking about the color of people's skin. We're talking about a lot of individuals are being denied access because of the color of their skin, their racial makeup, their ethnicity, and you can fill in the gaps. And because racism was never taught really in high school, we learned about the civil rights and that was about it. But it's important for every individual to begin to dig through history and not the traditional books you've seen. There are lots of documentaries that are available online right now, lots of pieces on YouTube, Google, NPR, just you name it. There's so many resources out there. Begin to educate yourself. and recognize that what you were taught in school, that there were a lot of missing pieces, and that the story that is you were told, this history that you told, that part of it was left out because the journey of people from different backgrounds was missing. And that there's a system of racism that permeates the United States culture that puts barriers for certain people. So while we may not like to talk about it, we have to recognize that people experience this country differently. You might feel uncomfortable, but sit in your discomfort and recognize that your discomfort, while it may be temporary, for other people, that discomfort could mean their death of their children. It could mean the death of their careers. It could mean their inability to live and work freely and buy homes. So it's a different experience. And so now is the time to educate yourself and begin to have frank conversation, feel the discomfort, sit in that discomfort, and be ready to learn.
That is some powerful advice, and I love the idea of really trying to embrace and learn and go through history and actually learn about everything that happened in people's different cultures. So I appreciate that. I think that was very, very important to share. And I wanted to ask you, because I know that you obviously do a lot of work in this space and you're passionate about it. So I thought it would be good to hear from someone like yourself that truly understands it. All right. So first of all, thank you again for joining us tonight. Great conversation. I love your passion. I love your energy, and I love your authenticity with your journey and what went well and what hasn't gone well. I always close the podcast with the same question for every guest. So what is the one thing, Karen, that's helped you reach your full potential? So that one thing that throughout your career, whether you're working for yourself or working for someone else, that's helped you be successful no matter what you've done.
For me, I would say it's my faith. I have a relationship with God. I believe in God. And I didn't say religion, I said faith and relationship. That's important. And that's been the game changer for me. It's helped me through the times when I had no money, I had no opportunities. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't know where I was going to get my next gig from, or how I was going to get through certain interviews. And my faith has been the one constant thing that, whether I had business or not, I knew that I was going to be successful some way, somehow. So my faith.
Well, I appreciate that. And we know from your story that your church is also the reason you were a great public speaker. So we also know that as well. So Karen, thank you so much. Again, we'll link to your LinkedIn in the show description, as well as the Workplace Success Group website if anyone wants to get in touch with Karen. I'm sure people you'd love to hear from people. So thank you for making time, and I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me, and see you to everyone else. Thanks. Take care.
Stay healthy. Be safe.
Yes, take care. You too.